Hi everyone, in this video we're going to cover entry requirements into Singapore. Then, so you know what it's like, we'll talk about our experience taking private transport by land from Malaysia into Singapore and then back clearing immigration. First, please do your own research as the requirements can change at any time and your experience may be different from ours. This information is specific to countries that are not required a visa to enter Singapore. If you think you may be a country that is required, please see a link in the description below for more details. If you are not fully vaccinated, please see the link in the description below to the official site for more details on that and to know what type of vaccines are accepted. Now, children under the age of 12 do not need to be vaccinated if they were born on or after January 1st, 2010. And the first thing you need is proof of vaccination. A digitally verifiable vaccine certificate is the preferred method. If you cannot get this, which is in our case, then you can present your vaccine certificates at immigration. There is additional information that will be required if you are presenting a non-digital vaccination certificate. Note, all travelers who have a history of traveling to countries and regions of Africa or South America may be exposed to yellow fever, and you will be required to provide a yellow fever vaccination certificate. Again, more information in the description below. Next, you need to fill in the SG arrival card. You can do this online, link in the description again below. This can only be completed 3 days before your arrival into Singapore. You are exempt from filling out this form if you are a Singapore citizen, permanent resident, or longtime pass holder. And this is if you are arriving by land only. Once you've submitted the card, you will get an email with details that you can present to the border official if needed. Finally, you must install and activate the Trace Together app. However, you can only fill out a portion of it before you actually enter Singapore. It will only let you get so far. So once you get past immigration, then you can click the Activate app. And that's it. I know it seems like a lot, but the process was actually pretty quick to fill out all this information. Okay, let's talk about entering and leaving Singapore by land. As mentioned earlier, we hired private transport and it turned out to be a wonderful, great experience for us. Why? Well, it's fast, it's easy, and very smooth. It's great if you have kids, especially a baby like us. You don't have to leave the vehicle, you get to stay in the vehicle the entire time, which makes it really easy. Also, it's a door-to-door service, so the private transport's gonna pick you up from your accommodation and take you to your accommodation in Singapore. We bought our tickets on Klook. It was very easy to use. We'll put a link to that in the description below. For both ways, we hired Toyota Innovas. The transportation cost going from Johor to Singapore was 250 ringgit. The return from Singapore to Johor was 100 Singaporean dollars. We entered Singapore through the Woodlands checkpoint and we exited Singapore through the Tuas link. So we got to experience both immigration checkpoints. Let's go over the immigration process from Johor to Singapore first. On our way out, I asked our driver, why aren't we just taking the Tuas link since it's very close to where we're staying here in Iskandar Putri? The driver said, because of the time of day, there should be no traffic going through Woodlands. So she knew what she was talking about, because once we got to the checkpoint, sure enough, there was nobody in line. We just went straight up to the booth. Getting stamped out of Malaysia only took about 5 minutes, I think. Just stamped our passports, made sure we were who we were. Now, we're gonna cross the bridge over into Woodlands and we'll see how that goes. And as you can see on this bridge, we had no traffic going into Singapore. However, on the way from Singapore to Johor was bumper to bumper. But once we crossed the bridge, there were a lot of cars waiting at the Singapore checkpoint. For each vehicle, they were checking the boot or trunk of each car. Again, only the driver was required to get out, so we stayed in the car the whole time. It took us about 15 minutes before we finally got up to booth ourselves, and the first thing they did was exactly the same as in Johor, is to match our passport photos with each person in the car. According to our driver, because this was our first time crossing since COVID, it took a very long time, which was about 30 to 35 minutes to go through this part. The immigration officer was pretty thorough. He wanted to know exactly where we were staying and he wanted us to show proof. So on my phone, I pulled up our Airbnb reservation. Then he wanted to know how long we were staying, what we were gonna do, when we were gonna leave, and where we were gonna go next. A lot of information. Then he asked to see our vaccination certificate, and this is when I presented the MySejahtera app with our vaccination certificates on them. And he was okay with it. As I mentioned earlier, we did not have a digital certificate through the Singaporean website, so we brought our actual certificates along with the information, and we're hoping that they would accept the MySejahtera app, and they did. So if you're coming through Malaysia, it's good to know. Then the officer asked us where we were going to stay upon our return to Malaysia. I think this is his way of finding out to make sure that we are actually going to go back to Malaysia in a couple of days. Luckily, I knew the address by heart, so I just told him what it was and he was happy with that response. I think if I didn't know that really quickly, I would have had to show it on my phone or in print form the address of the accommodation where we would be staying in Malaysia. Finally, according to Kaisho,
it was 47 minutes.
After 47 minutes, we were allowed entry with a stamp of 90 days into Singapore, even though we only needed a few. Now let's go over the immigration from Singapore to Johor via the tourist checkpoint. At the tourist checkpoint, it was the exact same layout as the Johor checkpoint leaving Johor. We went up to the booth and again, we handed him our passports and he looked at the photos and matched us up. After that, we cleared immigration. The total time took about 20 minutes because we actually had to wait a while in line before we got to the booth. Then we were on the bridge to Johor and a few minutes later, we made it to the Johor immigration checkpoint. And this was a little bit more strict. First, there was no line. We just went straight up to the booth and same exact process again, hand our passports over, match the names and the faces with the people in the car. Then the officer asked us if we were residents of Malaysia or of Singapore. We said no to both. So he wanted to know what we were going to be doing in Malaysia. What were we exactly? So this is where we told him we are tourists. So even if you are temporarily living in Malaysia or going to be staying long-term, let's say 90 days or something, never ever tell them that you are going to be living there, even if it's only temporary, because that's a red flag. The only time you would want to tell them that you are living in Malaysia is if you actually have permanent residency and can show a visa or something. This is where you need to be careful of how you answer the questions. The officer had a big smile on his face, but he was clearly interviewing us to be sure we were going to be leaving Malaysia at some point. In our case, from our passport data, he knows that we just crossed over into Singapore for a few days and came right back. So totally understandable that he's questioning us a little bit more seriously. He even wanted to know if we were living in Thailand or residents of any other country nearby. We just told him that we were traveling long term and that's why we had so many passport stamps, and he seemed to be okay with that. He then wanted to know exactly where we were staying in Malaysia and what were our plans. So it is always a good idea to carry accommodation information of where you will be staying to show to any immigration officer in any country whenever you're entering. Finally, he asked us about our plans to leave Malaysia. This is when we showed him our onward flight tickets. After he reviewed our tickets, he stamped our passports with 90 more days with a social visit pass. So make sure you have an onward ticket, which is a flight out of the country, especially if you're going to be doing this multiple times, because land border crossings are known as visa runs, and they are really clamping down on that. Overall, the time to clear Malaysia immigration in Johor took about 20 minutes. I think the times it took us to enter and leave Singapore was very easy and very smooth, and again, this is why we highly recommend you take private transport, because one, you don't have to leave your vehicle, and two, it's just great and really easy if you're with a large group or with a family. I hope you found this information helpful. We are a slow traveling family with over 10 years experience traveling. We will be making a series of videos showing you what we've learned along the way, and you might find these videos helpful. We'll see you in the next one.